Good morning, we're back to the Twits and we are on chapter 13. Mr. Twit gets a horrid shock. And if you remember in the last chapter, back in chapter 12, it was Mrs. Twit, she'd just come ballooning back down again after he'd tried to send her off up near to space. So we'll see what happens next. Mr. Twit, who thought he had seen his ugly wife for the last time, was sitting in the garden celebrating with a mug of beer. Silently, Mrs. Twit came floating down. When she was about the height of the house above Mr. Twit, she suddenly called out at the top of her voice, "Here I come, you grisly old grunion, you rotten old turnip, you filthy old frumpet!" Mr. Twit jumped as though he'd been stung by a giant wasp. He dropped his beer, he looked up, he gaped. He gasped, he gurgled, a few choking sounds came out of his mouth. He said, "Oh, I'll get you for this," shouted Mrs. Twit. She was floating right down on top of him. She was purple with rage and slashing the air with her long walking stick, which she had somehow managed to hang on to the whole time. "I'll swish you to a swazzle," she shouted. "I'll swash you to a swizzle. I'll nash you to a nozzle. I'll nosh you to a nazzle." And before Mr. Twit had time to run away, this bundle of balloons and petticoats and fiery fury landed right on top of him, lashing out with the stick and cracking him all over his body. There he is, that's as she's coming down. That is her now hitting him with her walking stick. Chapter 14, The House, the Tree and the Monkey Cage. But that's enough of that. We can't go on forever watching these two disgusting people do disgusting things to each other. We must get ahead with the story. Here is a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Twit's house and garden. Some house. It looks like a prison and not a window anywhere. See it up close there. Doesn't look much like a house, does it? "Who wants windows?" Mr. Twit had said when they were building it. "Who wants every Tom, Dick and Harry peeping in to see what you're doing?" It didn't occur to Mr. Twit that windows were meant mainly for looking out of, not for looking into. And what do you think of that ghastly garden? Mrs. Twit was the gardener. She was very good at growing thistles and stinging nettles. "I always grow plenty of spiky thistles and plenty of stinging nettles," she used to say. "They keep out those nosy little children." Near the house, you can see Mr. Twit's work shed. To one side, there is the big dead tree. It never has any leaves on it because it's dead. And not far from the tree, you can see the monkey cage. There are 4 monkeys in it. I'll go back and show you in a second. They belong to Mr. Twit. You will hear about them later. Wonder if you can see in the cage there. Can you see up close? There's 4 little monkeys. And there's the dead tree with no leaves. Doesn't look like much of a garden, does it? Chapter 15, Hug Tight Sticky Glue. Once a week on Wednesdays, the Twits had bird pie for supper. Mr. Twit caught the birds and he cooked them. And Mrs. Twit cooked them, Mr. Twit was good at catching birds. On the day before Bird Pie Day, he would put the ladder up against the big dead tree and climb up into the branches with a bucket of glue and a paintbrush. The glue he used was something called Hug-Tight, and it was stickier than any other glue in the world. He would paint it along the tops of all the branches and then go away. As the sun went down, the birds would fly in from all around to roost for the night in the big dead tree. They didn't know, poor things, that the branches were all smeared with horrible Hug-Tight. There he is, painting all of the trees, all the branches. The moment they landed on a branch, their feet got stuck, and that was that. The next morning, which was Bird Pie Day, Mr. Twit would climb up the ladder again and grab all the wretched birds that were stuck up the tree. It didn't matter what kinds they were. Song thrushes, blackbirds, sparrows, crows, little jenny wrens, robins, anything. They all went into the pot for Wednesday's bird pie supper. So next time we're on chapter 16, which is 4 sticky little boys. I wonder what might happen. I wonder if you can guess what you think will happen. 4 sticky little boys. If you think about the glue, doesn't sound very good, does it? I'll see you next time.